Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. We are going to talk a little bit about the teenage world and the teenage brain. So I hope you enjoy this session. And please, if you want to share your questions with us, save them to the end of the session. So we're going to talk a little bit. I will try to make this more interactive. So please share your opinions, share your ideas with us. Leonardo and Tiago are in São Paulo giving us some help. And I guess everybody's going to enjoy this session. Okay, so let's start. And of course, we have to find out what kind of features, what kind of characteristics teenagers have. So, how would you teachers describe teenagers in general? You can type your answers in the chat box. Lazy, stubborn, caring, dedicated, difficult. Okay, so I guess some of you shared your views on teenagers mainly because you deal with them, right? So let's see a little bit of how the brain works when you are a teenager. And I don't know about your age, I don't know how old you are, but I suppose being a teenager was not a piece of cake for you when you were a teenager. So I guess everybody knows what it feels like to have such rush of hormones and also dealing with parents that usually don't allow you to do everything you want to. How to deal with peers because everybody is afraid of being bullied at school. So we know what it feels like to be a teenager. It's not easy at all. And apparently, when it comes to physical differences or when it comes to the physical appearance, it's easy to know that the process of being a teenager is difficult anyway. But what goes inside the brain is what we are going to talk about today. And we are going to share some ideas on how to overcome such obstacles when it plays an important role during the learning process in the classroom activities. What can we do in order to overcome obstacles that the teenagers face? So I'd like you to think about these statements, and I'd like you to pick which one of them are true. Okay? So think about that. Adolescent brain changes start at around 12. First, with major increases in numbers of neural connections, and boys typically reaching each stage before girls. The second statement, the number of neural connections grows faster in teenagers at the age of 15, 16 years old. Practice doesn't matter much when it comes to teenagers because their brains are ready for any kind of task or challenge with no effort involved. So think about these statements. Which of them are true? You can use the chat box. The second one, the number of neural connections grows faster in teenagers at the age of 15, 16. Marina is saying 1 and 2 to Ivanilde. Who else has an opinion about it? No one else? Wow, so I guess the box of chocolate I have to share between Marina and Ivanilde. Is that true, guys? I guess so. Well, let's see if Marina is gonna have the chocolate box or Ivanilde. Let's check. None of them is true, actually. They are all false. Take a look at the baby laughing at you. Adolescent brain changes start at around 11. First, with major increases in numbers of neural connections and girls typically reaching each stage before boys. This is actually quite familiar for people who deal with teenagers. We always say that girls they get more mature sooner than boys. And the number of neural connections doesn't grow faster in teenagers at the age of 15 and 16. Actually, there is a major loss or pruning of connections, leaving stronger networks. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that quite soon. Practice matters a lot when it comes to teenagers because practice helps to keep these stronger networks. So, what is it that happens with teenagers? And actually, from the source I was reading and watching before planning this session, I saw that when we have the terrible twos, you know, when the baby has become a toddler and when they are at the age of 2, that's when the neural connections or the brain changes uh, very much, in a very high, it causes a very high impact. But when a person becomes adolescent, that's when we have the biggest changes in the brain. So this is something that probably you didn't know before because it was actually new to me, except the part related to the girls, because I always heard that when I was a teenager, I heard many relatives saying, well, Luciana is a little bit more mature than Rodrigo, than Flavio. So I guess that it was true at certain point because I felt that. I always thought that my cousins, they were silly, you know, compared to what I was at that time. So mature. Not true at all. Okay, so this session is taking into account the research and the book that this lady has written, and she's a specialist in teenagers because she's a novelist whose career changed after the success of her best-selling examination of the teenage brain called Blame My Brain. And interestingly, she has shared her knowledge with us, and I'm going to show you where you can find more about Nicola and her work. So, this is the cover of her book. And I guess that many of you are interested to know what happens exactly because we are not only trying to understand the process of how the brain expands or gets to deal better with the cognitive skills or inside the classroom, or maybe if you are a parent, outside the classroom. But the thing that interests us most is how the brain works, actually. And sometimes what we face in the classroom is the behavior that teenagers have towards things that we have proposed before and they have accepted in a very natural or in a very positive way, out of a sudden things change. And how do we overcome these obstacles? Because sometimes it's not actually related to the learning process itself, but the way we deal with them emotionally, psychologically. And this is what puzzles us as teachers, as parents, and probably this book can give us some light. Although the author, Nicola, she said that um, what we know about the brain nowadays, it hasn't changed that much, from what we knew in the past 10 years. Of course, the experiments, better saying, with the brain and the science has developed a lot, but the way the teenagers deal um, with the learning process, it hasn't changed much. Neuroscience has helped a lot, has contributed a lot to this whole process of understanding. But actually, uh, the studies, they haven't improved a lot. So what I'm going to share with you today is what science already proved, and neuroscience as well. And maybe you have heard or you have read something about it. But the most important thing about this session is that I'd like to share with you some ideas on how to deal with these difficulties in the classroom. How could we help our teenagers learn with more pleasure, or to learn in a more effective way, or maybe to learn um, in a more how can I say, empowering way? Because guys, they suffer a lot. Teenagers, they suffer a lot of pressure. They are under pressure most of the time, and usually for many different reasons, including the family background, including the school, the peers, the teachers, the fashion, the movie stars, everything is important for a teenager. And the hardest part is that um, a teenager sometimes doesn't have many people to share the feelings with. Although we know that adolescence is usually the time that we have our biggest friends, our closest friends, but it's not true to all of them. So it is really painful to be through certain situations in school or at home, and this is what we are going to talk a little bit more about. Okay? So, based on what Nicola shared with us, she's gonna give us some five main changes that affect the learning brains in the classroom. So, of course, the focus of the session is to talk about the classroom practice and how teenagers interact among themselves and with the teachers. But of course, and some things that I'm going to say, they are not only related to the classroom. They are also related to the world, to life anyway. So let's see the first one. Okay. So, the first thing she shares with us is that there are three natural stages. So when it comes to adolescence, we are not talking about the whole period, and the characteristics are the same all the time to all the teenagers. That's not true. We have three stages. So the first one starts at around 11. It's when they have their first major increase of neural connections. So it's a very important period of life when it comes to learning. So it's that time that they are not children anymore, but they are not a teenager already. So it's what we call that they are the betweens, right? They are between the childhood and adolescence. And when it comes to the classroom practice, usually they are open to projects, they are open to work in groups or in pairs or individually. They are eager to know more. They are not afraid of sharing opinions or sharing ideas. But things change a little bit when they go to the second stage. It happens between 11 and 14, and that's the phase that Nicola is saying it's called pruning. The pruning of connections, leaving the stronger networks. We are talking about neurons, we are talking about synapses. This is what we're talking about, and neuroscience has contributed a lot to this. Why does she use the word pruning? I don't know if you're familiar with that, but pruning is what we do when a tree has some dry branches and leaves, and then we want to keep it healthy. So we remove these dry and dead parts of a tree. So this is what we call the pruning. And then this is what happens inside the teenager brain. Um, they are going to the stronger networks of the neural connections that are stronger, they are going to be saved. But that's when the brain itself is going to select the more used ones, So it's time to give them more support in practice, more repetition, because practice as if they practice more, if they practice harder, especially the skills that they don't master, that's we are offering them opportunities for the brain to keep saving these stronger networks. So this is really important to know. Between the age of 11 and 14, they need more practice. And of course, they need more interaction as well, because then emotionally and psychologically, they are also changing because their body are changing. Uh, um, their bodies are changing. So we need to provide support not only for the learning itself, but also emotionally, psychologically, as I mentioned before. And the third stage happens at the ages of 15 to 16, and there is a name for that. She calls it myelination. It's because of the fatty myelin coats the neural pathways, helping messages pass efficiently. So it's when the learning consolidates, actually. So it's also another important phase. But what are the consequences in the classroom? Each individual reaches each stage at their own time. So it's very hard for teachers to expect the same development at the same time from all of them, of course. So we need to respect this individual time to reach each stage because it varies. And then that's why if you are teaching the sixth graders or seventh graders, well, actually a little bit before that, the fifth graders, you will see that some of them, they may sound a little bit more like a teenager, and some others, they are still acting as a child. This is natural, it's a natural part of the process. But we have to pay special attention to boys. At the age of 14, 15, it's hard to read between the lines, to have, this open mind and open heart to enjoy the literature, to use complex linguistic reasoning. But on the other hand, they may rock in maths. This is about the boys, okay? Uh, Something interesting that I have never heard of is that they lose a physical skill very easily, especially in boys, as their cerebellum changes more frequently, and it's crucial for physical coordination. So, if they spend a long time without practicing something, a sport or any kind of ability that they have, if they spend a long time without practicing it, they may lose it. But in quotations, because if they go back to practice, they may recover that. So we see there is room for learning all the time, but the kind of learning and the amount of practice that we offer makes a whole difference in the learning process. And I'm not only talking about the English language learning, but the learning itself. Then she points out the second main brain change, which is the undeveloped prefrontal cortex, the PFC. The thing is, if you see on the picture, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is dedicated to develop the sense of empathy, the insights, the response flexibility, emotion regulation, body regulation, morality, intuition, attuned communication, and fear modulation. And when it comes to fear, we are going to talk a little bit more quite soon. But if you see that this part of the brain is going to be developed until mid to late 20s, gosh, we need to, you know, take a deep breath and wait, because it's going to take time until it develops completely. And the impact of not having this completely developed is that sometimes teenagers are more um, they are risk takers for natural reasons. Sometimes they are discussing uh, values. They are not actually so worried about values because they are not ready for certain kinds of input or discussion. Emotionally, they are still under waves of mood swings, right? It's what we call mood swings. So if something very apparently very simple happens to them, it may be killing, depending on the situation, depending on where they are, depending on who saw it. So for teenagers, this is the painful part, and also for the teachers, because they don't know how to deal with certain things that adults think that they are ready for. And this is complicated, especially at home. If you are a mother or a father, you're probably dealing with that at home, and you know how hard it is to convince them that some things are considered right or some others are considered considered wrong, about this connection with themselves, with the inner knowledge that all of us have, called the intuition. And this is also considered nowadays another kind of intelligence. So, as you can see, it takes time until this whole process of developing the prefrontal cortex is consolidated. It takes time. So, it's hard, to deal with these parts of the brain that it's still missing, and when we need this the most, because teenagers, they have more freedom compared to the children. For example, some of them, they go to school on their own. They leave school at the time they want. In some schools, it is allowed. So it is very hard, not only for teachers, but definitely for parents to know how to deal with that. Okay, so what are the consequences in the classroom? Well, I've written here some sentences that I guess you're gonna find out the consequences in the classroom and what is missing there, or maybe what is too much in teenagers. They may say, I want to kill someone because my favorite t-shirt is ruined. So this shows clearly that emotions are hard to deal with. They don't know how to deal with things that apparently are easy to solve, problems that are easy to solve. They don't deal well with that, and sometimes they are even they feel more threatened if they know somebody else is watching or somebody else is seeing what is going on. So we are going to talk a little bit more about that soon, but it's just for you to get to know how deep the emotions are. But it's still, the brain doesn't deal well with emotions. It is hard, isn't it, guys? Better now than never. So if you can find a word to describe a teenager, you may say now, because this is what they are looking for. They don't imagine, or sometimes they don't figure about consequences of the facts or things that they want to do. So they take more risks. And of course, depending on the risks they are taking, uh, it's gonna happen only once, that's why parents, schools, directors, psychologists are so worried about adolescents, especially because of the number of suicidal teenagers that the schools are having nowadays, and the ideas of committing suicide. uh, it's present in all classrooms, in all families, unfortunately. I know that it may sound a little bit um, devastating, but it actually is. Some doctors, some psychiatrists are saying it's really worrying the way teenagers are facing life, the way they are dealing with life, and the way they think they can solve the problems by killing themselves. So um, that's why, we need to know a way to reach their hearts. That's the only safe road we can take to reach teenagers, because they are not ready for very high levels of conversations, maybe. But if it touches their hearts, that's when they stop to listen, because they must feel protected, and they must feel that somebody loves them and cares about them. So it's really important that we are aware of what is going on in on our teenagers' minds, to see what else we can do to help to offer support. Another consequence is this one. I'm totally concentrated, but look at those legs. And my father hates me because the sky is blue. And wait a minute, he's flirting with that chubby, stupid girl. So, what is that? This is a total, it's a clear sign that it's very hard for teenagers to concentrate, especially because their minds are usually very fast, they operate very fast, they have sometimes very negative thoughts about themselves, about the school, about the family, about the girl sitting next to them. So, especially the negative thoughts, they have a very big impact on the teenagers' level of concentration. So, if you guys deal or teach children, we also know that it's very hard for them to keep concentrated for a long time. But it's also true for teenagers. So, we see that the kind of activities we offer, we must take into account, although the teenagers are ready for to deal with more developed study skills, to work with them, to put them into practice, but still the level of concentration is really low. So variation of activities is fundamental if you want to uh, get your teenagers paying attention to your classes. Another reason, another huge brain change is that risk taking increases, as I mentioned before. Many teenagers are not risk takers. Oof, thank God, right? But statistically, this is the largest risk taking age group. So that's when we have the red light, that's not the red light, actually, the yellow light to call our attention to that. Imaging shows greater brain activity in teenager reward systems compared to adults when risk taking is contemplated, especially when peer presence is factored in. With the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, less in control, students may make poor decisions, relying on impulse rather than reason. So that's why I was saying before that we must find a way to their hearts, because their brains, they don't help much. See, because of the lack of the total development of the prefrontal cortex. So that's why um, it's important to know what they like to talk about, what do they enjoy doing on their weekend, what kind of talents they have. Things that we usually do with children, of course, in a more um, in a different way. But it is important to keep, this kind of self knowledge when it comes to adolescence, because I guess that this is what happens. Teenagers usually they tend to deny everything they were and they had when they were children. But still, they are not adults, so they are not ready to face some problems and some difficulties they have. Somehow they forget that they are individuals and they want to belong to the group, they want to be accepted by the group. And because of that, sometimes they do things that we cannot explain why they did such things. Um, and there are these reasons. And of course, if they are brave enough, and I'm saying brave in a negative way now, they are going to take risks that may be really dangerous. So it is important to find a way to their hearts. I guess that's the safe road, to listen to them, to try to give them this kind of special time when you are just going to listen without providing advice, because sometimes we are so worried and we are um, just thinking of how we can help that we start giving them uh, advice on something that they are not asking for. And actually, if we are going to act exactly like the other adults in their lives are acting, like saying what they have to do, what they can't do, we're going to do the same that the others are doing. And definitely, we are not going to build this bridge to their hearts. So what are the consequences in the classroom is that some of them, they tend to misbehave to gain group status or attention or respect. So we all teachers, we know how they can misbehave to get attention. Um, this is quite similar to what children do, right? But the thing is that they are a little bit older. Sometimes what they do to call attention may hurt the others physically or emotionally. So this is, a danger alarm, actually. Not take risks you wish they'd take. For example, the answering questions or volunteering to present to the class or to take part in an audition because of the next point I'm going to say right now. But this is something really weird for us, teachers to deal with. They are so brave, sometimes in a negative way, to gain group attention, but they're not brave enough to answer question or to volunteer. Public speaking, forget about it. They are not going to take any risks to do that. So it is hard for the teachers too. Um, what kind of support we may find, to provide them? I was thinking about this risk-taking thing, and actually, this is going to be hard for us to deal with if we are alone. But maybe if we count on the coordinator or director or the parents or a psychologist, maybe it's going to be a little bit easier because, as I said, sometimes they're going to take risks, and the kind of risks that they're going to take, they may, be extremely dangerous. And we are not going to deal with that alone because we definitely need more professional support. And of course, I guess in your schools, you may discuss that with other teachers because everybody's dealing with the same teenagers. It doesn't matter the subject you're teaching. Okay, the next point is that social embarrassment is heightened. Oh gosh, I was really, sympathetic to teenagers when I was reading and studying for this presentation because it is very hard, They seem to overreact to embarrassing social situations, and brain scanning shows greater and different activity compared to average adults. So maybe they really do feel it acutely. And this is the painful part, right, of being a teenager. How did you feel when you were a teenager and you had to present, any task in front of your group and you saw some people laughing at you or people whispering something that you, of course, thought it was negative about you? So, how did you feel? If you can recall these moments, you can see, how hard it is for teenagers to deal with such situations. So the consequences, of course, they are dramatic. The teenagers, they find it harder to answer questions or perform in public. They find it harder to ignore people laughing at them. They find it harder to concentrate if they think people are looking or laughing at them or talking about them, I would include. So, uh, all these consequences, as you can see, they are not only related to the classroom practice or environment. Actually, it's related to the teenage life and what kind of support we can give when we need to provide opportunities for the students to learn. And this is our main concern. How do we make them learn more effectively or in a more pleasant way or in a faster way? But as you can see, there is no recipe. It's not like baking a cake, definitely not, because again, each one of them is an individual, and although they want to belong to a group, they want to be accepted, they are still lonely because they are facing dramatic changes in the brain and in the world, outside. So it is very hard to find only one solution, and definitely um, teachers will try to give them different opportunities, but there is no guarantee it's going to be effective or it's going to be useful because one day they are acting in a way, the next day they are totally different. So, actually, I'm sharing with you my feelings about that because it's not easy to find only one way, and there is no guarantee that everything is going to work well. So, what I was thinking of is that we actually need to find different ways that certain activities are done, so instead of having them working individually, why not having them working in pairs? But then you will say, well, Luciana, I already do that and it doesn't work. Well, maybe it doesn't work if you are asking them to work in pairs for the grammar point, but maybe it's going to be useful if they read together, or it's gonna be great if they watch the video in their tablets or in their cell phones instead of having them, looking at the big screen in front of the whole group. So we need to try and test the students' reactions to um, offer them more support. Because, guys, to tell you the truth, it's really hard to know the way you're going to react when you do certain task or when you present something or when you offer um, opportunities for them to work in a different way because they change very frequently and from one day to another. So it is very hard to find out only one way. The secret, I guess, is to try as many different possibilities as you can, depending on the school you work on. Um, you can use more technology because this is definitely something that attracts teenagers a lot. So instead of using the workbook, for example, you may take them to a lab and ask them to work, on the platform. Then they're going to be, in groups of three, and in groups of three, they're going to present something they drew or something they painted. Sometimes we forget that art is a very, very important tool when it comes to learning. And then I'm not talking about the learning about arts, but to use art to express yourself. And teenagers, they need to express themselves. So why not using arts in your English class in order to allow them to speak, to say what they're feeling? I guess this may be really effective. And again, as I said before, this may be a route to their hearts. And this is the most important thing. Another point very important to mention is that sleep deprivation matters. Teenagers need around 9 hours sleep, but the sleep hormone, the melatonin, doesn't switch on until late at night. As for adults, so they won't be sleepy earlier. It means that they go to bed very late, about midnight or 11. Some of them go to bed at 1. But the worst part is that melatonin levels, they don't fall as early in the morning as for adults. So teenagers are still sleepy at school. Oh gosh. She didn't need to mention that, guys. You already know that, right? Add the fact that many extend their day with the use of screens and social media, and you have sleep deprived, borderline jet lagged brains in front of you. So, another obstacle when it comes to the learning process, when it comes to the content that you have to deliver in that class because you are behind schedule and the coordinator is asking you what you're going to do to save time. So it is also very hard for the teachers to deal with that. Well, when it comes to sleep deprivation, then it's something that it's beyond the classroom control. It's something beyond your teaching skills. It's something that, of course, the parents must be aware of. Um, Depending on the situation, some changes will be important, at home, like the use of cell phones or social media, because it's gonna be hard really the next day, when they wake up at 6 and they start the classes at 7 o'clock, they are not ready for that. So it's not that the brain is not gonna work, it's because their bodies are not gonna work. So it's a whole um difficulty, right? It's a whole uh, problem you have in your classroom. What are the consequences in the classroom is that we have high levels of stress. You can say it again, of course. Loss of concentration, definitely. It is also true for adults. Mood swings and inability to self-regulate. Be poorly nourished, as sleep loss leads to eating too much sugar and junk food. Wow. This is not actually new, right? It's not brand new information. So they also have poor immunity to illnesses, and this is again beyond the classroom environment. So as you can see, many factors influence the learning process, the teenager learning process. And as I said before, even if you think that that they are showing they don't like you, or they don't like English, or they don't like the books, actually the reason is not you, the reason is not the book, the reason is not the school. Maybe the reason, they don't even know what it is, because they are, in the middle of a process that is not offering them too much support. The body doesn't help much as well. And I'm not only talking about the brain, I'm also talking about the hormones. So it is very hard, to be a teenager. And of course, it is easier to deal with them or to deal with anything when we understand how it works. So I guess it was important to share with you how the brains work and the way the teenagers are affected by many different factors. Because, as I said before, maybe just providing opportunities for them to express what they feel using arts, using music, using videos. Maybe it's gonna be a way to reach their body, their hearts. I'm sorry, and to reach, their talents. As I said, um, when you are a child and when you do something really well, people always clap their hands, to you. The thing is that when you become a teenager, uh, people don't do that anymore because, well, if they did, you would react in a very negative way. But the thing is that the teenagers, they don't need applause, but they need to know what they are good at. As you could see the beginning of this webinar, I was talking about practice. So the more they practice something, the better, because they're gonna, keep the stronger network, the neural connections. They're gonna save them. So offering more practice of something that they show they are not good at, it's a good way to overcome, these problems. But also to offer variety. They need to work with different ways, different tools in order to find out, and also to provide to the brains another input, another way to save this knowledge, to preserve this. And I guess it's going to be something, it's going to be a challenge, definitely. But, well, teachers, they are ready for the challenges. Otherwise, they wouldn't be teachers. Do you agree? Okay. So now, I'd like to know if you have any questions. The challenge for me is to please teens. Yes, because they don't know how to please themselves, Marina. That's the truth, because they're never happy. Yeah, they show this. Actually, this is the way they react emotionally. But deep inside, they can become very happy. But the thing is that they don't show, because showing they are happy or showing that they are sensitive is a risk. And sometimes they don't want to take this risk. Um, so it's very hard, for them to deal with emotions and feelings anyway. Um, Ana Karina Maciel, how to keep my teenagers classroom motivated? Yeah, this is a billion-dollar question actually, because Ana Karina, uh, as I said before, after reading these content for this webinar, I saw that there are far too many reasons why teenagers are demotivated. The thing is that we need to find, like a very little opening, or a very tiny signal that they are open or willing to do what you are bringing to the classroom. Usually, songs and videos, they are very effective. So they are tools that you can use to motivate your teenagers. But of course, you may say, well, but I cannot use song and videos all the time or in all the classes. I agree with you. But there must be a way to use the songs and the videos for the learning, for the purpose of that lesson, and also provide them opportunities for them to create songs and videos and presentations. They are afraid of doing things on their own and present to the others, as I mentioned before. They don't deal well with that. But if you ask them to work in pairs or groups, uh, they may be more willing to do. So I guess the patterns of interaction, they must be different, in a class. Instead of only the teacher talking to the whole group, try to ask them to work in groups, and then you have student interaction. That's the way we keep them, changing, and we are offering them different kinds of opportunities. So I guess that, well, maybe I would take this road, definitely. Any other question? Nope. Okay. So now I'm going to share with you some uh, nice and interesting tips because, as Ana Karina, I guess all of you are interested in secondary groups, and you are willing to know what kind of things I can do to keep them motivated. How can I vary my classes? How can I offer more? How can I make them happy? So we are going to give you some ideas on how you can get more prepared, or more um, you can get more knowledge, more information on how to deal with teenagers. And we have in our channel on YouTube these talks with Nicola, um, whose work I just presented to you. And the videos are very short, so if you don't have time, you can watch, um, one at a time, so you don't need to watch everything in whole. So I guess it's gonna provide important information to you on how to deal with them. As you can see, the title is Teaching Teens, and we have more on teaching teens in our YouTube channel. And also, talking about YouTube, we have our new page, Learn English with Cambridge, where we can watch many different kinds of videos in order to provide support for teenagers, for the students who are going to take Cambridge exams, or adults. So it's a very interesting page that you can find lots of input, but the focus of the videos are on the learners. So it's not mainly on the teachers, but actually on the learners. It makes a difference. So you can also spread the news with your students. They may enjoy watching the videos later. Also, we have our secondary hub in our website. And if you go to cambridge.org, Cambridge English, you click on catalog, and then you go to secondary. That's where you're going to find lots of resources and teaching teens some top tips videos, where you can also find more academic information, scientific information on how to work with such age groups. Classroom management. This one I thought it was really interesting. Take a look. Don't spend too much with your back turned. Don't spend too long, right? With your back turned. So there are some very useful tips on how to um, work with teenagers and what else we can do to make them motivated. So maybe, Ana Karina, you can visit this channel to find out more on how you can make them motivated. Because, guys, when you turn your back on them, that's they read this as, well, it's time to switch off. So that's why maybe using the board too much, may be, an obstacle to you. So it's a good idea to watch this video later. We also have more resources, and that's where I found out the article with Nicola, what we know about the teenage brain, helping students control their mobile devices, building compassionate student teacher relationships. So we have, gold in our website, in our secondary hub. So I guess you're gonna benefit a lot from visiting this page. More from Cambridge Secondary, we have the Explore the Secondary Archive, where you can find lots of resources, extra ideas. We also have our blog, World of Better Learning, where you can find many experts around the globe sharing their views, their ideas, their findings on teaching secondary groups. So I guess it's worthwhile, visiting.